Okay, we're recording.
Thank you, Julian. Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It is April 8th, and this is the Municipal Accountability Review Board, and the time is 10:05. Calling this meeting to order. I am Kimberly Kennison. I am the designee for Secretary McCaw. With me today is Christine Shaw. She is the designee for Treasurer Wooden. And the first item on the agenda today would be the public comment period. And under the public comment period, if there are folks that are on this call today that wish to speak in front of this board, please state your name and your town, and we will give you an opportunity to speak with this board. I will ask you to limit your comments to 2 minutes, but I just want to find out first how many people are wishing to do that. All right, seems like we don't have anybody today. Then I'm going to move on to the next item on our agenda, and that is going to be the approval of the minutes of March 11th. And can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
And I'll
Thank
second.
you, Christine. Thank you, Tom. Any discussion? I do not hear any discussion. Julian, can I have a roll call, please, for a vote? And please let us know whether you are in favor, opposed, or you wish to abstain.
Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Waxenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Luciano,
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton,
Yes.
Mr. Felsigno,
Aye.
Mr. Brockman,
Abstain.
Ms. Shaw,
Yes.
Ms. Kennison.
Yes.
Are there any other board members who have joined the call that I didn't mention? And that is everybody.
Thank you, Julian. Okay, the minutes have been approved. Thank you. We'll move on to the fifth item on the agenda, and that is the town of Sprague. We have an update that was provided to you in your packet, and the next meeting is scheduled for May, just so you are all aware. At that point, we're going to then look to possibly have a special meeting beforehand, but I just wanted to bring that to folks' attention. Julian has a update on the meeting that took place, and he will then give us a update as far as the audit was presented at that meeting. Julian, would you like to provide an overview from your write-up?
Sure. The meeting in March was actually the first meeting of the subcommittee in quite a while. We reviewed the FY20 audit, and the highlights are included in the brief write-up. The town did eliminate much of the general fund deficit from the prior year. There's just a little bit in the red at this point, or as of June 30th, 20, at $48,000 negative fund balance. And there is a deficit that continues in the capital non-recurring fund, and that was actually related to one new finding in the audit dealing with budgetary controls over capital expenditures. The town will be developing a policy and procedures for addressing that. 3 findings were closed out in the audit. 3 have carried over. 2 of which are one has been resolved, one is nearing resolution, and then the last may actually take another year or more. That one is revolves around a comprehensive set of policies and procedures, and the town has a 2-year plan, or had a 2-year plan to essentially complete that task. Then we also the Board of Education budget for FY22. That budget, as proposed, increases just shy of $100,000. It's within the range that was included as for assumption purposes in the 5-year plan. And we will continue our next meeting of the subcommittee will likely be a special meeting in April to review a proposed budget from, which would be the Board of Finance proposed budget. We don't have a date yet, waiting on the town to develop and provide us with a budget adoption calendar. So that is just something to have on your radar screen. We will be trying to schedule a meeting hopefully pretty soon if we're looking to approve a budget in May. And that is what we covered the Sprague subcommittee.
Thank you. So at this point, I'd like to discuss the monthly financial reports unless somebody has some questions on the audit side of life for the town or the high level of the budget. But otherwise, we can then move on to the monthly update. Unless the town would like to also provide any additional feedback regarding their financial statements. Sorry, Tom.
Yeah,
That was Tom.
Just wanted a little more background on the deficit in the capital non-recurring fund. I'm not a member of the subcommittee, and I don't belabor it, but I'd just like to understand a little bit more clearly how that occurred. I don't know whether that's Julian or someone from the town of Sprague.
I'm going to let the town take the lead on that.
Okay. The deficit in the capital non-recurring fund occurred with overages on projects that were not funded, and there were no funds for, so the general fund paid for them. And additionally, there were unbudgeted, unapproved items that were paid for out of that that area, so that put us in a further deficit.
This has been a practice, Tom, that has been ongoing, where they would have little overages, so it has built up. And this past year was an additional amount that was not covered within the budget. Correct, Cheryl?
That is correct. It was it was an additional amount that was not approved through the proper channels and was taken from that account. But there were no funds to cover it.
And how much did that deficit grow for last fiscal year, 1920?
Wasn't it like 100,000?
It was around 100,000, probably slightly more than that. I think it might have been 150,000.
And is the capital non-recurring fund under budgetary control? Is it on your general ledger, and do you have a budget established for your projects that you're running through that fund?
Well, currently we don't have any projects that we are running through that fund, and I don't believe it's on the general ledgers. In particular, there are breakdowns of the projects in there, whatever the projects were, and there are reports that go out, to the Board of Finance monthly for that.
Okay, well, I don't want to belabor the point, but it sounds like there's some follow-up there that, I mean, I guess at this point, if you have a deficit in the fund, and unless you've got new money coming into your capital non-recurring fund from some source, you really shouldn't be running any activity whatsoever through it, and you really need to put together a plan on how to fund that shortfall, if you will. But I don't belabor it. So
No, I totally agree with you. We are not actually. This is something that had occurred in a previous administration and is not occurring now. So the expenditures aren't happening unless they are funded. And we are trying to look at a plan that we can gradually work to offset that deficit and make the account whole.
Tom,
Okay,
this is a material weakness finding, so it definitely will have to, it will be on all of our radar.
okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions regarding the audit? All right, then let's move on to your monthly update, status update.
Okay, with our monthly update, at the end of February, the revenues were slightly lower year over year due to the deferment of the taxes. But just not on this report, but just to give you the information that by the end of March, we are at a par of where we were last March. So that has caught up, and so we are right, pretty much even on the tax collection rate. All of the invoices are at 30 days or less, which we are working to keep them at that and actually chip away to get, down to be able to be current with everything. And all of the expenditures are on track year over year, on a par with what they were last year. I'd be happy to have any questions that anybody might have about them.
Any questions on the budget for the members? Excuse me. No questions regarding the monthly update here? And is the Board of Ed on the line? I know that.
I'm here. Bill has
Michelle.
not come in yet. Yes.
Okay. So let's just provide for the board the projections that you have for, I know that your projections are built into the regular monthly, but we have included the financials there and what you're projecting for the end of the year.
We are projecting a reserve of about $160,000. We do have a little bit of a deficit in tuition and transportation, but anticipate that overall we will have a reserve. We saw a reserve, and mostly it was our salaries and substitute lines.
Okay, do you have a lot of vacancies?
We had a lot of turnover this year with our paraprofessionals and our daily subs, and we just didn't fill some positions. So we were able to just cover it internally.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the Board of Ed? All right, I don't see any. Then we can move on to the next item on the agenda. Thank you, Sprague. Wait a minute. Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Town of Sprague. We can then move on to the next item, which is the Town of West Haven.
All right, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. West Haven's here.
Good morning.
Well, good morning.
I have the mayor and Michael Milone, Frank Chaplinsky, and Lee Tiernan.
Hi.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Michael.
Hi.
So the first item on our agenda today for the town is a subcommittee update, and Julian has provided a write-up in the packet. And Julian, do you want to give an overview of what occurred at the subcommittee level?
The bulk of the conversation had to do with an item that's on this agenda, which is the FY22 budget. So I won't go into detail on that other than to say that the subcommittee reviewed the mayor's recommended budget and did provide some feedback. And we did compile the feedback and observations into a summary document that was included with the budget materials that went out for this meeting. And then the city also announced that they've gone live with the ADP system. I believe the Board of Ed had maybe another payroll cycle before they were going live, and I believe they are live now, but we can get an update on that if I'm if I'm mistaken. And then the next subcommittee meeting will be April 20th, and we'll be reviewing, continuing the discussion about the FY20 budget, possibly seeing some revisions based on feedback from this meeting.
Perfect. Thank you, Julian. So then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a review and discussion of the possible action on a labor contract for Asks Me Local 1303-345. This contract was provided to the MARB committee ahead of time so that we would give enough time to provide the committee an opportunity to review and potentially see if they would like to take action on this. Based on the timeline, if you choose not to do that, there is a subcommittee meeting, but it would require that we have to have a special meeting. So rather than having a special meeting, I thought that we could at least bring it to your attention, get some overview of this contract with us today. Is the city's legal counsel to be able to provide us with some background. The contract covers, 27 employees for the sewer plant employees, and the contract expires on June 30th of 2020. The tentative agreement ratified by the union on March the 19th, and City Council approved is expected to approve this on April the 12th. MARBS does have an opportunity on May the 6th to take action if we choose. The next full MARB meeting will be May the 13th. So therefore, that's why we wanted to bring this to your attention. And I can turn it over to the city and or your legal counsel. You decide to go through the materials that we have.
I'll start. My name's Chris Hodgson. I'm from Bertram Moses, and I'm the city's labor attorney. Good morning, everyone. We settled a 3-year contract with the Ask Me union to provide for a wage increase of 0% in July 1, 20, a 1% general wage increase July 1, 21, and 2% July 1, 2022. I believe that's consistent with the city's 5-year plan. We also increased premium share effective July 1, 2021 by 1%. That goes to 13%, and by another 1% on July 1, 2022 to 14%. And then we had some language regarding overtime, that time worked contiguous with the end of the employee's regular shift will be paid for actual time worked. So that would not trigger some claim that there could be time and a half due as a callback. So that was the agreement.
Any questions from the members on this contract?
I don't have any questions. This is Sal. I just have a comment. It's consistent with what the other bargaining units received. So,
thank you for that feedback. And I believe, Julian, didn't we have a very a similar contract that we had for West Haven in the past?
And that's probably the contract that Mr. Luciano was referring to. 681 was approved. Okay. I want to say September, October timeframe, had the same salary and same progression in the employee health insurance cost share.
Thank you.
Questions? Tom, yes, Tom. And I want to confirm, I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but that this group is in the city's defined contribution plan. There's no defined benefit pension plan for this group. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and I'm supportive of the contract. I think the wage increases are modest and very reasonable. And I'm happy to see the increase in the premium cost share. I do think the current premium cost share at 12% is on the low side, so I'm happy to see that there is a bump up in that in year 2 and year 3 of the contract, and I certainly can support this contract.
This is Steve Felsigna. I
Yes,
also
Steve.
am in favor of the contract. I think it's a very favorable contract for all. My question is also the contribution, the 12, 13, and 14%. Is that in line with? I know Mr. Luciano mentioned that is that particular part of the contract in line with other contracts in West Haven and the surrounding, maybe some of the surrounding towns? Would Mr. Luciano know that or have any idea? Is that about where it should be comparatively?
Well, I'll answer, and then if Mr. Luciano has any thoughts. I believe it is, with respect to the state partnership plan, that the union's agreeing to switch coverage to the state partnership plan involves a reduction in what they're paying in the premium share for the PPO, for example, so that the towns generally are at that 12, 13, 14 that I've seen. And this is consistent with the other bargaining units in the city.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question, and I appreciate the context and the comparison with other agreements. What impact, if any, does this agreement have on pension benefits for the members?
There was no change. They'd continue to get their defined contribution plan.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, that's Mark. In examining this, hi. In examining this, I would suggest I have no concern about the contract, but if you go through the contract, the positions listed don't match the positions that are outlined in the contract. You need to clean it up. You have 22 people in one area, 23 on another sheet. Then there's 27. I assume you're adding 4 positions. The names don't match the information given to Marb. It's just a matter of cleanup. I've seen this in other contracts, especially Hartford's, where they change names and they add positions and they don't transfer or update that into the original contract. So I would encourage both labor and management to go through those sections to make sure that all of the positions match the titles and that the numbers are accurate relative to the amount of people in the unit. Because right now it's off depending upon which page you're looking at. So I would just ask you to, before it's finally drafted, that those be cleaned up a little, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions? Would we like to take action today, and can we get a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve. Sal Luciano?
Sal, you're making the motion? Or
Yeah.
Tom?
I'll second the motion. Tom.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Any other discussion? I don't see any other discussion. Can we get a roll call vote, whether you're in favor, opposed, or you wish to abstain? Julian?
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Waxenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Luciano?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Yes.
Mr. Felsigno?
Aye.
Mr. Brockman?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Yes.
Ms. Kennison?
Yes.
Are there any other MARB members who have joined the meeting that I did not mention? And that is everybody.
Thank you. The motion has, this contract has been approved. So that is good.
Thank you.
Good day's work. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is to review and discuss the recommended FY22 budget. The subcommittee reviewed that budget in March, and the subcommittee has some recommendations that we have included in, that Julian has included in the materials for you today, and with a bit of an overview. A detailed review of the recommended budget also is included in these materials so that the MARB the full MARB board can take a review and get some feedback on their FY22 budget. We then would need to prepare a written synopsis of our MARB feedback back to the city, and then the city will need to respond with the adjustments to the budget, review with the subcommittee again on April the 20th is when we will review this and include the 5-year plan to the subcommittee for both documents. And the city council then has until May 6th to take action on this budget. And then the full MARB approval for May 13th is the timeline at this time. And Julian, do you want to do highlights, or shall we have the city then go through the budget? High level.
I think the materials in the packet pretty well provided a lot of detail, and I would leave it to the city then to hit the highlights they want to touch on.
Okay, thank you.
Just before we get into the detail, one question. Where's the 5-year plan?
That's going to get provided to the subcommittee at the next meeting.
That's not a lot of time.
Excuse me?
That's not a lot of time.
I have the model completed, Mr. White. I'm just waiting to hear back. We have been notified of additional pilot funds coming through to the city, but the number I have heard is anywhere between $500,000 to $1.5 million. So I wanted to wait until the subcommittee to drop in that final number if we get it from the state, rather than submit a plan with anywhere from $500,000 to $1.5 million potential gap in it.
No, I appreciate that, Frank, and I appreciate what what you've done. But some of the analysis of the budget depends on the sustainability. We have had some conversations about breaking up this party and perhaps having you guys leave our oversight, and that depends on when certain milestones are hit, and that may affect this budget. So my request, subject to the secretary, is that you get that to us as soon as possible in advance of the meeting, and maybe even the full board gets it, just so they can look at it before the 13th.
Understood.
Thank you.
As I said, I have the model ready to go. I'm just waiting for the final pilot number to drop in.
Yeah, it's always a problem when you have extra money.
If need be, what I can do is put the model with the low end number in there, and we can always adjust it afterwards.
Yep, that would be good.
Okay, so
Have them give us the number.
yeah. So from the budget, from a high level perspective, I think Julian did a great job of putting together a synopsis of it. We've gone through the various line items. From the revenue perspective, just a couple of changes that we put into this year compared to prior years. In the line item on page 10, recording of legal instrument fees, that is inclusive now of the increased conveyance tax for property sales. So we did put an assumption in there, although it's a low-end conservative assumption. The other major change, as you would have noticed, is that the $2 million of restructuring funds from the state have been removed, and we did put in $1.57 million from the federal relief plan. The mayor has spoken to Senator Blumenthal and had gotten assurances that that money was available and could be used in that particular line item. Everything else on the revenue side, I think you'll see is consistent with prior years. We did drop the assumption around the investment income coming from STIF. As I'm sure you've seen for the current year, that return is nowhere near what it used to be. And we're seeing that all over, not just with the state funds, you're probably seeing it in your personal CDs and money markets as well. From an expenditure side, we did build in a number of new hires into this budget. So we have an additional person, an HR generalist in the personnel department to help shore up that department. That is directly as a result of the HR study that was done and the recommendations of the MARB. In my own department, we're doing some redefining of job descriptions. We're adding an administrative floater, which will spend most of his or her time in the finance department, aiding with the record keeping and the administrative functions around accounts payable, around the purchasing department to help maintain the bids. That, as you recall, was a write-up on a previous audit, so that should clear up that as well. And the individual will also aid with the grants department in maintaining those records and assisting the newly defined position of a junior accountant / grants accountant, whose responsibility will be primarily to ensure that monies spent on various LoCIP projects, federal grants received, private grants, even capital non-recurring, et cetera, all of that is being accounted for correctly, and all the proper requests are being made back to the state. I think what we've seen in the past is that money has been spent for various projects that have been approved by the state, but never requested back. So the city put the funds out, never requested to get the money back.
Not never.
Well,
Timely.
not on a timely basis. Not since I've been here. So we're hoping that this position, we're expecting this position to be able to satisfy all of those requirements. We have an additional detective coming in for the police department. And just bear with me a second. We had an additional person in the IT department as well. We have a network supervisor in the budget. We did hire an IT manager this year who started about a month and a half ago. We have a new addition of an IT network supervisor. This individual will aid in the network security. Will be on-site 24, well, for lack of a better term, 24/7, right? So on-site, available when needed. That should significantly reduce the city's need for outside consulting as far as the IT budget goes. So overall staffing, we're increasing by 5 heads. You know, as we look through this, I think the mill rate reflects the drop relative to the increased grand list. You'll notice that the tax revenues for fiscal 22 are in line and in fact slightly higher than the 5-year plan. That is directly contributable to the difference between the $2 million restructuring funds versus the $1.6 million of federal funds. So, as we look through the expenditures, we've gone through the healthcare using both the estimated premium costs that we receive from the state, as well as using the actual projections from Lockton as far as the retirees go. The retiree healthcare from Lockton's perspective are growing at double-digit inflation year over year, as opposed to roughly 6.5% to 7% within the partnership plan. So all of that is built in. The debt service was built using the detailed from the 5-year capital plan that is included in the budget. So all of the bonding activity in the fiscal 22, $19.7 million, of which the bulk of that is the high school project, 13.5, as well as an additional, an additional 1.8 million for Washington School, which is going to be rebuilt as well. So all of that has gone out to Bond Advisor and has been returned to us with their projections on what the capital debt service would be. So all in all, I think it's a strong budget. It's a well thought out budget on from my perspective, and I think it satisfies the requirements of the city as far as the 5-year capital plan goes. There are no material deviations from that. Some savings that we've seen on the debt service being reinvested in the people. So I think all in all, the city is well on its way to making the structural changes that it needs to do in order to maintain viability and feasibility. So with that, I will take whatever questions the board has.
I think it would be helpful, Julian, if we just brought to the committee's attention the items that came forth from the subcommittee. One of them that is coming to mind and is the 1.5 million for the one-time funding, the utilization of that money from the American Rescue Plan Act. Part of the discussion that was had at the subcommittee level, as the city is not going to use the $2 million of restructuring fund and replacing it with one-time funding of this grant funds, is that the secretary brought to our attention that she is looking for a contingency plan on that funding, because we do not know if there'll be any restrictions on that funding that's going to come from the federal government. That has not been issued yet, the guidance. That is one of the items that has come out of the subcommittee. You didn't go over Allentown. I know that Allentown's budget was also an item that that we were asking for some changes from the subcommittee. And Julian, can you please help me with the other items that were on that list?
Excuse me, Kim?
So we can bring that to the members. Yes.
I'm
Frank?
sorry, I did forget to mention Allentown.
Okay.
The mayor would like to give you an update.
Yes, Allentown last night, we had expressed the concerns to the city council. They had one of their budget meetings last night. And so Allentown did transfer and put $350,000, not transfer, that they put $350,000 more against their unfunded pension liability. And they also put $50,000 into OPEB to set up an OPEB trust so that they can start funding OPEB. That then increased the mill rate from 10.91 to 11.62. So there was movement on that, and that satisfied pretty much, I believe, what the committee was looking for.
Keep in mind that mill rate is coming down from 14.2, correct?
14.02.
0.02. And that was built into the plan. So we really need to look at the impact of Allentown as far as not keeping that in a trajectory so that it would continue to increase to deal with the unfunded liabilities. So that was part of the discussion.
No, I
So we'll need-
understand, but there was a reevaluation and they had their grand list went up. So we worked with Michael Mylone to try to find, so that, again, we weren't going to leave it at 14.02 with a different grand list. Now, when we did the 5-year plan, as everybody's well aware, we had no way of knowing. We were hoping our grand list would grow up, and we're very happy that it did, but it did go up considerably in Allentown. There has been a lot of improvements in construction there.
Okay.
And as far as the number one, which is the city, the contingency plan, I understand if this money wasn't coming or there wasn't any kind of instructions with it, but there is one instruction that has been held through in anybody's office that I have talked to, and that is COVID funding. And we have in excess of the 1.575 of COVID expenditures in the budget. Not only for FY22, but I've been told that we can use the funding for FY21 as well for certain things, and one of them is COVID expenditures, which we do have quite a bit. In fact, Frank's in the process of aggregating them so that we can take a look at the actual amount.
So you built in COVID expenditures into the budget, but not the revenue? Is that what you're suggesting?
Right, we didn't put any revenue.
We didn't build any.
No, we put the 1.575 as revenue, but we have COVID expenditures in there as well. And then we have COVID expenditures in the current budget as well.
But the American Rescue, I was assuming, is separate funding versus the COVID funding. Are you stating that so we were giving, the state was giving COVID grant funding? Is that what you're referring to?
No, federal. This is the federal.
The federal?
The American Recovery Plan. And as
Right.
I said, I best to do my due diligence to check with offices, not only with Senator Blumenthal, Senator Murphy, Rosa DeLaura's office. We actually had a presentation from our treasurer the other night at one of the meetings. And although some of the stuff is vague right now, they say that there will be a lot more direction coming very, very soon. And the money is supposed to hit shortly. It's not supposed to wait. It's supposed to be within 60 days. And they're making it sound like it may even be sooner, that half of the money will be coming to the city of West Haven, which would be $9 million for that. Additionally, we did not take into consideration the distressed municipality funding, which is 4.9, I believe, and we did not take into consideration the change in the pilot, the restructuring and the tiered pilot now. We did not put that in, and the reason we didn't put those two in is because that was the only funding that the secretary said do not use any of it in the budget, and we did not use any of it in the budget.
Right, because the state budget has to be approved first.
Correct. And that's the other thing, and hopefully Julian can help us with this, because we're getting numbers all over the place from, like Frank said, $500,000 to 1.7, so we don't even know what's possibly on the table. Not that we're putting it in, but it'd be nice to know.
I don't have those answers at this very moment, so if we did, we would definitely share them.
Okay, well, thank you.
And so the secretary still requested a contingency, so I don't want to take that off the mark. And that is one of the items as a follow-up item.
Could I just make a comment, and maybe this is maybe a suggestion to Frank, and I don't know. We're all sort of waiting for guidance on how we're supposed to be using this American Rescue Plan Act funding and how we need to account for it. But one of my assumptions, frankly, down here at least, is that we would need to account for that in a separate special revenue fund as opposed to throwing it in the general fund. Now, I may be wrong about that, and maybe it'll be perfectly fine to have it in the general, in as a general fund revenue, but you may want to consider particularly if you've got one-time expenses that are sort of baked into your budget that you're going to reasonably be able to say these are somehow COVID related or pandemic related or related to recovery from the pandemic, sort of strip those out of your general fund, move them off into a special revenue fund budget for American recovery, and then put the revenue over in your special revenue fund. I mean, that was how I was expecting to need to deal with it here. So I'm just throwing that out as a possible suggestion, because you might run into some issues about dropping it in as a general fund revenue, because then you can't really say it was used for this specific purpose.
Thank you,
you're
Tom.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You're
No,
absolutely
no,
right. We've had those conversations, the assistant finance director and I, along those exact same lines of taking the funds, the funds and whatever expenditures we've identified, putting them in a separate fund, and then as needed, draw down to either cover if it's permitted for capital projects or whatever. To divvy it out that way, but I'm in absolute agreement. I don't believe that if the city is receiving $9 million or $18 million, whatever it is, I wouldn't expect to drop that into the general fund.
Why not?
Who said that?
Wasn't me.
Can I make a request, Kim?
Yes, Julian, please.
As part of the follow-up, could you, by the subcommittee meeting, just break out what the related expenses you were anticipating would be? I know we don't have firm guidance yet, but what you were anticipating would be eligible uses that are currently embedded in the expenditure side of the budget, then we can at least sort of match the 1.5 million in revenue to what you anticipated being able to charge off to that if you were to actually have to move it into a special revenue fund as Tom suggested, and just being able to kind of match the dollars.
Sure, we can take a stab at that.
Thanks.
That's where I was going with your expenditures when you had said that they were already baked in. So that I think is definitely necessary. And Tom, thank you for your input and feedback and guidance. I think that should be included in one of the follow-up items from the MARP. Any other discussion here about the budget? Mark, are you speaking? You're on mute. You're on mute, Mike. Mark.
Yeah. The Board of Education budget is flat funded.
Yes, sir. Board of Education.
My assumption is that they will get increases in state aid and federal funding. So the flat funding is on the local side, but they will still be getting monies on the state and federal side for increases, though. Through
Mr. Waxberg.
That is correct.
Mr. Waxberg, it's Matt Cavallaro from the Board of Ed. Yes, we will make up the difference between the state aid and federal funding.
So we've requested from the Board of Ed, Mark, to provide us with the grossed up numbers, including for the Board of Ed, to include the grant funding and the grant expenditure, so that this way we're not just looking at the flat funding, we can look at the whole Board of Ed as a whole. And because the grant is not solid yet and it's anticipated, we still want to move forward, because it then has an effect on what we look at when we get to the subcommittee.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Other questions?
Not a question. I just wanted to point out, and I did send that back a week ago with the letter, that I know that there was a request for the mill rates for the fire department, and I pointed out the timelines that we won't have those in fact, two of the budgets aren't even done yet. Allentown's all set, but the other two districts aren't, and the West Shore district won't have their definite mill rate until it's voted on Memorial Day weekend. So that is like to June. So we can, I don't even have an estimate for either one of them right now. Center District, we should know on May the 4th. They have their meeting then, and they vote on the mill rate. But as far as West Shore, that will be through Memorial Day before we have a definite on whether or not their mill rate was accepted.
Can I make a suggestion, Kim?
Yes.
That
Yes.
maybe because I know that the timelines don't work out in terms of having adopted or even proposed mill rates from the independent districts, but if we had a table that stacks up the general fund mill rate and then as proposed with the existing mill rates for the fire districts, and then alongside that sort of another scenario. Michael Milone has done a lot of detailed analysis on the impacts of the reval. If we could get perhaps what the independent district mill rates would be after just adjusting for reval, just so that we can get a complete picture. We know it'll be very preliminary in nature because we don't have proposed mill rates from the fire districts yet, but it'll at least kind of give us some point of reference, if that's possible.
That's a good that's a good suggestion.
Julian, or Kim, if I could just add one thing to that. The mayor
Yes.
had asked me to sit down with the two fire districts and basically take them through the whole revaluation analysis we did with the general fund.
Perfect.
So we're going to do that tomorrow, and my hope is that early next week we could at least develop what Julian had mentioned, and that is at least an aggregate gross mill rate showing the impact of the city's taxes, the fire district taxes, and a ballpark of what the range might be in terms of where the two fire districts end up. But we should be able to get that to you by next week, I think. Again, not finalized, but at least a general idea of the totality of the tax impact.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Anything else, Julian?
No, not on that.
Okay. Anything else regarding the budget from the members? Julian, do you have the list of the other recommendations that came out of the subcommittee that we can just mention? Besides the Allentown and besides the one-time funding? I know it was the 5-year plan. The 5-year plan.
Those two items were specific suggestions. Then the other items on this summary were sort of observations, suggestions.
Okay.
So and follow-up items.
Okay.
So we had we need to get prior year actuals and current year projections built into the budget tables, the 5-year plan, as we mentioned. As soon as we can get that, and we'll get that out in advance to the full board if we so they have additional time to look at that. An update on the consolidation of the pension fund investments that was discussed. We were told that the RFP for that was already out. And then we just talked about the district mill rates and sort of a remind. I think it's more of a reminder than anything else that we should be seeing an updated pension valuation, at least for the fire district. I don't know if for the city as a whole is on the same cycle or not. I don't think it is. We should be getting an updated pension valuation probably late spring, summer timeframe that then reflects the new mortality tables and a revised discount rate. Those are just some of the things that kind of popped up in the discussion and the debriefing.
Thank you. That's helpful. for the MARP. So if we have no other questions about the budget for FY 22, then I'm going to move on to the next item of the agenda.
Okay, so you've all received
Which-
the financial
monthly.
summary. Yep, so you received the financial summary. Revenues, as you recall, last month, the tax revenues were well under the prior year due to the snowstorm that occurred and closing banks and City Hall on January 31st. You'll see that, as I had mentioned last month, they are back in line again. The tax collection rate is at 95.9% compared to 96 and change in the prior year. So we are back on track. The tax department has begun the lien process. Liens have been identified. Notices are going out. So we expect that process to continue with the sale of the liens probably happening somewhere in the April in the May timeframe. So moving forward with that. On the expenditure side, I'm not seeing anything major. As the mayor had indicated, I have sent out a notice to all the department heads to make sure that before the end of this month, I want the full 9 months of any COVID-related overtime, actual expenditures, et cetera, identified, so I can move them out of their individual departments and into the account that we have set up in the other/contingency area. There has been some costs moved out already, but I have asked them for that by the end of the month, and then on an ongoing basis, I'd like to get that from them so that we can move it on a monthly basis. So that will aid in my cost projections as we get closer to the year. From the sewer department, so as of right now, I have taken down the cost expectations around the healthcare based on where we are seeing it run. I expect to be able to drop that expense estimate further over the next month or two once I see what the current periods are coming in at. But so that has been reflected. We have dropped the debt service number to match what the official debt obligations for the year are going to be. That was $200,000. And you can see on page 8 of the financials, I have added a line and broken out of the contingency area the COVID-related expenses that had previously caused some confusion and some questions relative to why the other/contingency was so far out of whack compared to budget. So those are COVID expenses that have been identified so far. Once I get the estimates and the numbers in from the department heads, as I said, that number will change. The sewer fund is on track. I am projecting a $250,000 roughly surplus for the year. That maintains, at this point, that maintains the bulk of the contingency in there. Should it not be needed, you could see that line item on page 11 would generate additional surpluses to the West Haven Sewer Fund. So no surprises there. As far as Allentown goes, we are still seeing the overruns in the personnel costs. That's the overtime. Just as with the police department, as I mentioned last month, with police and fire, if one of those individuals is out on quarantine, we cannot leave that shift unmanned. So there is significant overtime in both the police and fire departments related to the pandemic. And I've asked the chief for his projections on that. You know, what we could do is see if there are any funds left for the city that could be applied to that. So as we get closer to the year, we should be able to get a better handle on that. But at this point, no real surprises. Things seem to be, knock wood, seem to be improving as far as processes go. So the projections are getting cleaner. You'll see that we did make a change to the Board of Education forecast, and thank you to Matt for being able to provide that. So they are currently estimating $125,000 surplus to come back to the city for the year. So if there are any questions from the board, I'll happy to entertain them.
Yeah, thank you for breaking out and noticing that we're going to have a surplus, Matt. I know that you are conservative. In looking at the numbers, I'm thinking that we're still on a conservative side.
We are.
Even with the 125 on the Board of Ed side.
Kim, yes, we're definitely still being conservative. As I said, the last meeting, we're still planning on extending the school day before the end of the year. So some additional expenses will have to be made for that. The plan is not set in stone yet. So once that is, I'll be able to be a little more realistic with where we're going to be at the end of the year. And the one thing I'd just like to highlight is our health insurance. For a number of years, it is run extremely under budget. We're not seeing that at this point this year. February was an extremely high month in claims, so it's something that I am looking at, but I don't think it will be detrimental to our overall budget.
Okay. Any questions from the board members? I had one question just from the from the sewer, and that's when you look at the budgeting, and I know that you're going forward with your proposed budget for the new year, and you compare it to the actuals and the trends of the actuals. I'm just wondering if the budget, if they're just really like rolling forward the budget versus looking at what your expenditure trend is, because at the end of the year, it looks as if some of these lines could be readjusted. I don't know if you provide any input to this, or you just get the information, Frank.
We just get the information. That budget is approved and generated by the sewer commission.
Okay.
But the
Yeah.
fund has generated surpluses in the past few years.
Right.
We are expecting to have some significant capital requirements relative to the sewer lines. You could see on page 123 of the budget.
Yes.
That's the 5-year capital plan. In the grants and other sources, we do have a placeholder in there for the outflow pipe. And the entire project is expected to be, north of $33 million. So.
Okay.
In addition to that, Kim, Lee Tarrant, we're under an EPA consent decree, and they mandate they mandate a pretty high surplus that we retain until we're out of that consent decree.
How long is that? Do you know?
Well, it's at least another year, possibly 18 months.
Okay. All right. No other questions? Then we'll move on to the next item of the agenda. And thank you, City of West Haven. Appreciate your time and joining us today and bringing the MARB up to date. The next item is the City of Hartford, and we have provided Julian has provided a material update in the packet. And Julian, you want to give a quick overview of what occurred when in our work at the subcommittee?
We had two items on the agenda, both of them related to the Board of Ed. We reviewed the Board of Ed's recommended FY22 budget. The request relies on level funding from the general fund. It does make use of the committed fund balance from prior year's balances. We also took up continued the discussion around special education. Had a guest from the school finance. I'm getting the name of the organization wrong, but the state school finance organization also presenting at that, and continue to look at what the city or the district can do to manage and monitor special ed costs, particularly the costs of students that are in the open choice program and receiving services out of district for which the district is then being invoiced.
And you were accurate about the Connecticut State Finance is the name of the company. All right.
And the next meeting is on April 22nd. And that's it.
All right. Let's turn it over to the city to give us an update on your monthly financials for February,
Great.
please.
Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody is doing well. I'll give the high level, and then obviously happy to address any questions that the board has. At the highest level, the current projection for end of fiscal year 21 has continued to improve. What we are estimating based on these period 8 numbers that are in front of you is a year-end surplus of about 4.2 million. The drivers of that we've continued to see positive property tax collection. In particular, we've seen some positive variance on prior year collections. And our expenditures have continued to come under in large part due to attrition. I will say, I think that it is very likely that we'll see some continued improvement in this number. In particular, I think we are still being pretty conservative in our estimate of healthcare costs at year end. As we've talked about in prior meetings, we think there's a lot of potential volatility in those healthcare numbers and the possibility that we'll see a spike. So we're not taking those savings until we're confident about them. But I do think we do anticipate some further improvement there. And probably some further improvement in some other areas, including payouts, cash outs from retirements. So I think that once we get past the next month or two, this number will likely improve further, which is important because as you know, we've relied on that for the continued funding of our capital plan and continue to prolong our capital and our commitment to avoiding new issuance of debt and funding our capital investment with general fund dollars. Happy to dig into any details that the group would like, and I can go through additional detailed summary if you like, but why don't I stop there and see if there are particular areas that the board would like to focus on.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have anything at this moment. I'm at
Yeah, this is Tom Hamilton. I was just going to offer an idea for the Hartford Subcommittee and the folks looking at Board of Education there. One experience that we had here from, I guess, about So I don't know if somebody's not on mute, but I seem to be getting a lot of feedback.
I have the same feedback. Maybe if we go off camera, sometimes that helps because it might be too much draw on the bandwidth.
Okay, I'll try that. So I was just going to offer up a suggestion, particularly with the American Relief Act funding becoming available. One of the things that we did, I guess 3 or 4 years ago now, was recognizing that our special education costs were rising very rapidly, driven in large part by outplaced students going to private schools that we were unable to service in district. And so we ended up striking an agreement at the time with the city to fund what we termed a special education development fund. And now with the American Relief Act funding, I think it would provide an opportunity to fund something like that with these grant funds. And the purpose of that fund was to build capacity to provide services in-house. And so over a 4-year period, we went from 137 students who were outplaced to currently about 62 or 63 students who are outplaced over a 4-year period. And it's it's quite an undertaking because it means building the capacity, particularly to service students who are on the autism spectrum, and to build the programs in-house. And you have to sort of do this incrementally, because once students are outplaced, it's very difficult to actually bring those students back. But as new students who are coming up through the system are identified, if you have the programs in-house to service those students, you have a much better chance of keeping those students in district if you really have a full spectrum of special ed services available to those students. And we've found it's been very cost effective, actually. It's reduced our out-of-district tuition costs by millions of dollars. It's reduced our reliance on outside contractors for related services, OT, PT, and so forth, by millions of dollars. And so it occurs to me that with this relief funding now available to cities and to school districts, this would be potentially a very viable option for particularly larger districts like Hartford to look at, to see whether or not there's opportunity to build some capacity in-house and ultimately save themselves some money long-term on out-of-district tuition and contracted services.
Thank you, Tom. That's very helpful to hear. That you have actually made a lot of progress in that area, and it's actually paying dividends. So this is really great news as we, talked in depth about this at the subcommittee level. Mayor, do you have any comments?
No, I think that's a really good suggestion, Tom. Superintendent, I don't know if the superintendent's on, but she and I talked yesterday quite a bit about the school district's plans for the funding that they've received. And they've received a total of $127 million in direct allocation. Obviously, there are going to be a lot of calls on that as the school district works to try to help students recover and catch up, including a significantly expanded summer learning, and then expanded day and tutoring and counseling and a number of other things through the year. But I think that's a good suggestion for a way to use those funds in a way that potentially has more lasting impact for the district. So I will certainly raise that with the superintendent and the board, and think that would be an appropriate subject for further subcommittee work as well.
Very good.
The issue is a little bit more deep than that. The subcommittee did discuss the capacities of program for the city of Hartford, similar to what Tom was talking about, which has to be assessed. But what you have is really the open choice issue, percentages of students that are Nexus students in Hartford that are going to open choice that you have no control over relative to PPTs and outside placements. So there's two pieces to this puzzle. one of which Hartford has control over that Tom is referring to, that the subcommittee has discussed and should continue to discuss with the superintendent about building capacity in-house. The other piece is and more troublesome, to be honest with you, is the expenditures of dollars outside for students that are being open choice students, magnets, charters, et cetera, where the school system has no control over those placements. So those are the issues that need to be a little bit more delved into, because I don't, looking at it and being involved in this since the 90s, I don't really think that people understood the unintended consequence of special education costs and programmatic impact. They were just talking about the big desegregation effort. Well, we are at a point now where Hartford is spending over $120 million on special education costs, some of which is under their control, some of it is not under their control. And that is what the discussion at the subcommittee level is trying to get at with the superintendent through a variety of tables, charts, graphs. I think the only way of dealing with it is through an examination of policies, procedures, and fiscal oversight policies and procedures. But it's going to take a while. But we're at a point now, Mayor and the rest of MARB, where there are significant dollars in special education that, if left unattended, will drain that budget to a point where the programmatic money left is going to be dwindling for the remaining 75% of the students, let's say. So it's an undertaking that's well worth delving into at this point in time by everybody, including the city side. Even though obviously the board operates independent from the city, there still should be some coordination, which I'm sure there is. So Tom's recommendation is well taken, and we have discussed it at the subcommittee level, but there is a piece that may even be more concerning regarding the impact of the budget, special education budget for Hartford, that's to some degree just not under their control and or oversight. So, but we'll keep working at it, because it is an issue that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Mark. And any other comments on this topic or the monthly operating budget? I had one suggestion or question, Mayor. In your budget, when you start to move forward for the next year, for fiscal year 22, has it been taken into consideration or can it be taken into consideration the model that you have built for the library and the way that that's called out? And we always have this reconciliation between the revenue lines and the expenditure lines. And if we could look at the model a little differently going forward, I'm just, placing that with you. I don't know if there's reasons.
You mean just from a presentation standpoint?
Yeah.
I think easy enough to do that. We can just yes, I think we can easily do that.
Yeah, it looks out of whack when you look at the budget, because you budgeted for 14 million. As if we look at last year's, it looks like the revenue side. I'm talking revenue in the other financing sources. And part of that is directly connected to the library. And then when we look at the expenditure line, it's saying that you need a budget of 8 million, but last year you only spent 1.5, so it's skewed.
Right.
And
one of the, I'm sorry to interrupt, Kim. One of the reasons that we've done that is just being conscious of the fact that this is not a permanent arrangement, and that we want to account for this in a way that recognizes that this expenditure is a long-term expenditure commitment for the city. That said, from a presentation standpoint, it is confusing, and while this arrangement is in place, I think it'd be easy enough to switch that up.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor.
Jen, Leanne, if you feel differently, feel free to disagree.
This is Jen. I agree. We'll take care of that.
Perfect. Yeah, what's going to mind is a contra expense for the library, which would then move the revenue within the same area. All right. And no other questions for Hartford today?
I know this is not on the agenda, but do you want us to talk at all about the 2022 budget development process and American Rescue Plan dollars? Or you want to save that to a future meeting?
No, we have time. You may bring us up to date.
So we'll be submitting my recommended budget to council on April 19th. So a couple of weeks from now. We are planning from a revenue standpoint, we are planning to budget the amount of municipal aid that was included in the governor's proposed budget, notwithstanding the fact that there are additional bills, including the pilot bill that are that have been passed. And until the state budget is out, we think the prudent thing is to budget based on the governor's proposed budget. We do not use any American Rescue Plan dollars in our budget, and I am determined to make sure that we end up there. I don't think that we should be using the American Rescue Plan dollars to supplement regular budget expenses. That said, I do expect to present to council the plan, the sort of multi-year spending plan for the American Rescue Plan dollars at the same time that I submit the budget. There will be a balance of investments in meeting urgent needs exacerbated by this pandemic, and assuming the Treasury guidance allows it, making some longer term investments that help us to accelerate our progress in building a more vibrant economy and grow the grand list. There will be a relatively even divide between those two goals in that plan. The plan does, the act does, as you know, allow municipalities like states to use some of the American Rescue Plan dollars to fund city services to the extent of revenue reduction from FY19. We are still waiting to see what that guidance looks like, and to the extent that we are allowed to look at specific categories of revenue, like parking, for example, which is down, even though our overall revenue is not significantly down. Right. We may use that as an opportunity, not to just fund our base budget, but to do some things that we would like to do more if we can. As an example, with the funding that we have, we hope to be pushing forward a number of economic development projects. We need some additional capacity to manage those projects. And so we might use some of that funding to help fund some of that project management. As we roll out the phased implementation of our residential licensing program, which is meant to improve our the housing quality and housing inspections, we may be able to get up to the long-term appropriate level of housing inspectors now, rather than waiting for the full scale-up of that residential licensing program with the revenue that it produces. So that's a quick summary of a very quick summary of where we are. But we'll obviously present the full budget to subcommittee and to the board. But I just wanted to give a sense of some of those highlights.
No, thank you. That is very helpful for us to hear your plan. I appreciate that. Any
Great.
questions from the members? All right. We do have I think that's it for Hartford today, since nobody has spoke up. So thank you, Mayor, for coming and providing us with an update. We appreciate it. I don't have anything on the next agenda item for other business. I don't know if anybody else here has anything for other business. Julian, did we have anything? I don't think so.
No.
No. All right, then the next agenda item is a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, Steve Felsigno.
Thank you, Steve. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Christine. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. If there's any opposed, speak now. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
See ya.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Weekend.